Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. If I can get you to grab your seat and we will start this session and hopefully have you out to lunch on time as well. Now, Kylie Porter is the CEO of Greater Whitsunday Alliance, the peak independent economic development organisation for the Mackay, Isaac, Whitsunday region. And the focus of the alliance is not centred on one specific industry. It has a remit to deliver across all key driving industries in that region. That includes mining, agriculture, tourism and biofutures. Kylie has more than 25 years marketing and corporate communications experience, and she's going to be our facilitator for this session, which will boost a short case study before a discussion with another stellar panel of experts. Ladies and gentlemen, a big warm welcome for Kylie Porter.
Enjoy. Thank you. Good morning all. Oh, that's nice. I like it when the audience is intimate enough that they can respond to me from the front row. So, good morning all. My name is Kylie Porter. As Madonna mentioned, I'm the Chief Executive Officer of an organisation called Greater Whitsunday Alliance, or GW3 as everybody likes to refer to us. GW3 is an independent economic development organisation for the Greater Whitsunday region, and our role is to support economic growth through connecting opportunities and preparing our region for the future. I like to explain my role at GW3 as one half regional cheerleader and the other part regional concierge, where I connect the regional economic opportunities. I didn't bring my pom-poms today, but that's really the best way to describe exactly what I do. So if you have any technical or science-based questions about what we're doing in region, in the biofutures or the bioeconomy, I'm not the girl for you. I'd like you to direct all of those questions to Professor Ian O'Hara. I am cheerleader concierge, but can absolutely take you on our journey. I'd like to commence by acknowledging the traditional owners of the various lands from which we gather today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in today's forum. I'd also really like to thank Claire Bain and Life Sciences for the kind invitation to speak and facilitate today's session. I'm sure most of you here think that you know everything there is to know about the Greater Whitsunday region, but it's probably timely for me to remind you of a few key details, and I'd really like to take you through the story. The Greater Whitsunday region is not just greater by name, but we're also greater by nature. We're home to 3 local government areas: Mackay, Isaac and Whitsunday. We cover a footprint of some 90,000 square kilometres, and I've skipped a slide somehow. And because we are so large, that would actually make us Europe's 20th largest country if we were just to consider land mass. So even though we're big in size, we're actually relatively small. We only have 174,000 permanent residents and around 85,000 workers. Our region is one of Australia's true economic powerhouses, however, and the Greater Whitsunday region adds more than $42 billion to the national economy. So we actually deliver the goods on a fairly enormous scale, given the fact that we only have 174,000 permanent residents. Traditionally, our region has had its roots firmly in agriculture. However, over the last 3 decades, we have progressively become more focused on mining and the highly technical mining services and equipment sector, otherwise known as METS. And this actually puts us in the box seat to pursue biofutures as an additional value-adding sector to our regional economy. And this is why. So our region has a capacity to competitively produce some of the world's most dense feedstocks. This little table gives you an example of that. And this actually doesn't even take into consideration that in the next 5 years, the Greater Whitsunday region will also become home to one of Australia's largest aquaculture precincts, further enhancing our biomass credentials. And there's a little bit of a lag, so please bear with me. There we go. Oops. So how do we achieve the transition to a sustainable biofutures sector in the Greater Whitsunday region. The fundamentals are all there. We have biomass, we have ports, roads, technical skills and technical experts and research facilities. The ingredients for this successful transition all seems to be there, right? It's going to be easy. How hard can this possibly be? And you're right, it is going to be easy, but where do we actually start? The scale of the opportunity seems so immense, and how do we actually go about finding, the end of the biofutures ball of string? To fully establish a biofutures economy in the Greater Whitsundays, we are leveraging the collaborate, communicate and pilot and prove approach. Through the establishment of a biofutures leaders group, we collaborate closely with key stakeholders and government. Members of the leaders group invest in project research and analysis and have financial skin in the game. In the coming weeks, the leaders group and the Department of State Development will release our market sounding report, which matches our regional biomass strengths with international market opportunities. This is helping narrow our focus and our area of strategic work. Our region is now actively pursuing a biofuels processing facility. And we know that as a direct result of the investment our region made in the market sounding report, that DSD and others are now involved in advanced commercial negotiations with a number of proponents. At the same time, we've backed up this piece of report with other research and mapping exercises to further prove out our regional bio-credentials. The communication component, though, is critical. To be successful, we need to ensure our producers, our community and our leaders at all levels understand the journey and become biofutures champions. This stage is not easy, and the challenge of keeping the message simple and relatable is very real. I'm a communications expert and it challenges me on a daily basis. As bioeconomy leaders, I think we all need to embrace the challenge of bringing bio opportunities into the mainstream. And to do that, we're going to have to keep it simple, stupid. And lastly, pilot and prove is the final piece in the Mackay and Greater Whitsundays biofutures process. Pursuing new and emerging industries take time. In my commercial experience, success begets success. And we need to apply this principle to the emerging sector. The Greater Whitsunday is eating the biofutures elephant one bite at a time. Establishing pilot or demonstration-sized projects is a key priority, because we know that if we demonstrate something in real life, hands-on, we are likely to encourage more to join our biofutures coalition of the willing. Research, data, mapping, analysis only gives us part of the story. And don't get me wrong, we will continue to focus on those elements, as business as usual, and continue to prove out our credentials in biofutures. But the foundations of collaboration and communication, and that just give it a bloody go attitude is equally just as important. Now is the time to think and do differently. That just because it's the way we've always done something doesn't mean it should be the way we will always do it. At GW3, we are working hard to lead our stakeholders and our community on that journey of change. That's our case study and that's our story. If you want to find out more information, you just need to head to the GW3 website. If you click the Transformation Region button on that website, you'll actually find a whole lot of more stories about how we're on our journey towards a new economy. I'd like to invite our panellists up, if we can start our session on ag and feedstocks, Professor Mark Brown, Matt Kealley, Professor Bernadette McCabe and Mark Smith. And we also have Polly, I believe, who's joining us via Zoom. Good morning, Polly.
Morning, everyone. Hope you're all well.
So take a seat and we'll get started. Now, if I can also remind our audience that if you would like to ask a question of our panel, just to scan the QR code, click on the morning session little tab and pose your question there. And once we're finished, the end of the formal part of the panel, I'll be able to throw our panellists some questions. So first of all, Polly, I might start with you. If you'd like to offer our audience a really brief introduction about who you are, where you've come from, that would be great.
Okay, so I'm Kylie Burey. I'm actually based at the University of Southern Queensland in Toowoomba, and I'm in Toowoomba this morning because we have graduations as well, so sorry for not being there in person. I actually here at USQ lead the food science program and also lead a research team focused on value adding to what we call food excess and food byproducts. We don't use the word waste. So our team's interests are really in how can we use some of the existing resources in this space to create value for producers, processors, and so on. From a technical point of view, and trying to simplify that down, we focus on tracking nutrients through supply chains so we can optimize the products that we create, and also that ties into the whole value proposition. I also wear a couple of hats. So my background is actually in chemical materials engineering. So my focus is also on dealing with other types of byproducts that may not necessarily be bio, but they can be combined with biocomponents, such as fibre from agricultural feedstocks to create new products as well. So my interests are quite varied. I've got a picture of oranges behind me. So we do work with quite a few different types of horticultural produce and the byproducts and edible type things as well, how we might turn them into new materials too. So that's my interest there.
Excellent, thanks Polly. We'll work from right to left, or my right to left. So Mark, if you could give us a really brief introduction. Sorry.
Matt, do you want to go Matt? Yep,
so we've got Matt and two Marks, and so I will call you Mark B and Mark S, okay, to make sure that I get it correct today.
Well, g'day everybody. My name's Matt Kealley. I work with CaneGrowers, and we represent 70% of the sugarcane growers in Queensland. So you say we keep your life sweet. When you think about the bioeconomy and how cane can contribute, we grow 30 million tonnes of sugarcane across 2,100 kilometres of coastline from the Gold Coast to Mossman. We produce 5 million tonnes of sugar and export 80% of that to Asia region. Our total sugar supply chain generates about $4 billion in the economy every year, and for every dollar generated in the cane growing sector produces about $6.42 to the economy. So you think about the value it can create right there. Of that 30 million tonnes of biomass, we grow that in one of the most variable climates in the world, and even in cyclones, floods and droughts, we can still produce a crop, so the sugarcane is quite resilient. And the feedstock has many uses, as I'm sure you're aware, from sugar, energy, electricity, biofuels, pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals, fibre packaging and bioplastics and biopolymers. But we focus mainly on sugar because that's where the value is at the moment. We do have some sustainability challenges. We grow cane adjacent to the Great Barrier Reef, and buyers of sugar and products are wanting sustainably sourced and sustainably produced products, and there's a huge social licence to operate in agriculture. And other drivers coming through at the moment are environmental and social and governance needs of businesses, and many companies are setting net zero targets for emissions and looking to trade carbon. But that creates a lot of opportunity. We also have a sustainability program that supports this. So Smart Cane BMP, which supports best management practices, is used by growers for sugarcane production. It supports productivity, profitability and sustainability. And it's third-party accredited, which means any product made from sugarcane can be considered sustainably produced. So think about how that could translate. And the most interesting thing we're doing at the moment is that CaneGrowers is investigating the use of blockchain technology to show traceability of smart cane sugar and get value back to growers. And so by using Smart Cane BMP, blockchain technology, we're seeking to provide provenance increase market access and provide greater value to growers in the market. We developed a prototype and we see there's about 6 or 7 areas of value which can be created from market access, supply chain efficiencies, carbon trading, natural capital, ecosystem services and improved risk management. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Mark B.
Mark B. So I'm Mark Brown from the University of Sunshine Coast. I am the Deputy Director of the Forest Research Institute and the Director of the Forest Industries Research Centre. So obviously we work in the forest supply, timber supply side of it. So from a biofutures, bioindustry, bioenergy perspective, a lot of the work we do is with industry, similar to described with the sugar industry. We work with about 80% of the plantation and forest managers in Australia. And the challenge we have around these new markets, because timber has been and continues to be used for high-value products for building systems, pulp and paper, fibre, clothing, and other products, but these emerging opportunities around the bioeconomy, the material we're looking at, we're trying to overcome decades of suppliers viewing that as a waste or a challenge in their supply chain. And as a result, on the supply side of it, we're struggling or working around the concept that this now has a value and it's a product and it has to be integrated into all of the operations as opposed to being treated as a secondary opportunity in their supply chain. And then if we go to the other side of the supply chain of people emerging with ideas and opportunities to use that material productively, we have to overcome a similar issue of treating it like waste or a challenge in the supply chain, and that they view it as a low cost or cheap opportunity. And there's been more than once where someone that has been working on a concept to use forest residues, plantation residues, or waste from the timber supply chain have contacted me to say, look, you need to talk to the industry partners. They're giving me numbers that make no sense. And when they tell me the cost of supply, it's only really the cost to pick that material up and get it to roadside to deliver. They haven't added any value for the material. So there's perceptions and understandings of what's possible and feasible economically. So within all of those challenges and working with industry perceptions and supply issues, our focus is around sustainable supply of a high quality material, sustainably managed within the scope and possibility of what the forest, landscape and land management can support.
Bernadette.
Thanks, Kylie. Bernadette McCabe from the University of Southern Queensland, based in Toowoomba. I'm a principal scientist with the Centre of Agricultural Engineering and have been working as a full-time researcher since 2014, but working in this area of intensive livestock industries and also food processing industries for the last over 10 years now. And I work with these industries to basically turn their waste from a liability into something that is a valuable commodity. And it's basically in the area of turning their organic waste into biogas, recycled water, and also biofertilizer. So really honing in on the closed loop approaches for these agricultural industries to take what is a cost to them to basically make them more profitable. Over recent years, I've also extended that work out to local councils and working with them on areas to divert organics from landfill as well. And so basically using the same principles around anaerobic digestion, biofertilizer, but also extending other conversion technologies which are appropriate for various feedstocks. And I guess this is the whole theme of this forum around agriculture and also feedstocks. I also play a role as Australia's national team leader for the International Energy Agency's Bioenergy Task 37, Energy from Biogas, and have been in that role since 2014. So essentially what I do in that exchange is to bring knowledge from other member countries to Australia and contextualise that for Australian conditions. And so that has assisted a lot in my thinking around what's useful for Australian industries. Task 37 is actually the largest IE bioenergy task and it's made up now of 19 member countries. So it's very diverse. It started out to be quite Europe-centric, but it also involves other countries like Canada and some other Asian countries as well. So that's it in a nutshell. I won't go into any detailed research because I'm on the Research Innovation Forum again this afternoon, but thanks, Kylie.
That's okay. And Mark?
Mark S. Yes, hi. Mark Smith, I'm the CEO of the Waste Recycling Industry Association of Queensland. Been in the role for about 12 months coming up, or escaping Victoria just as they went into lockdown. Prior to this role, I was heading up the Victorian Association, and prior to that, used to work at Sustainability Victoria on a number of programs, and EPA Victoria in waste crime. I suppose the area that I'm kind of interested in is really an acknowledgement that the economy, and I think we all kind of sense this, is is transitioning, is changing, and we all kind of want to be influencing that process in the most positive way possible.
Excellent. All right, so what we'll do is we'll just move into a series of questions. I'll direct them specifically to a panellist because, unfortunately we are constrained by some time. So I'm actually going to start with you, Bernadette. And that's, clearly there's a huge amount of research around ag and feedstock currently underway, not only in Queensland, but obviously across the globe. Are we closing the divide between research and commercialisation? So are we getting closer to being able to actually implement in a very commercial sense, the research that you've been proving out for a long time?
I'd say yes. The fact that all my research, it's all industry funded. So we need to be having it applied to industry as soon as possible. And so much of our research in agriculture is already applied on and off farm to a certain degree. But I think it's that divide around, what is beyond, the research. And I think an example is a recent project, well, a current project we're working on, but we've just finished an organics business case for Toowoomba Regional Council. And they've, a progressive council who are looking forward to going beyond landfill gas capture and actually looking at how we can actually remove organics from landfill and actually turn it into a valuable product, and whether that's an energy product or a higher value product. And so what we did, it was essentially a desktop study which looked at, first of all, what's the collection systems, what is it going to go and do FOGO? Yes, it would be a 3-bin system, but then you then have to match the feedstock with the right technology, and then to look at further, what will be the cost savings given the waste levy as it increases $5 per annum, into the next few years. And I think it's the implementation then of that strategy, and that's the beyond the research side of things.
And is that your experience, Mark B?
Yeah, look, on our side of it, we are seeing similarly some commercial outcomes.
Yep.
Similarly, all of our research is industry funded, so it is towards that end point. Probably some of the challenges is kind of getting over that first hurdle, that investment. So you find a lot of the projects we're working on is trying to overcome the chicken and egg issue of confirming supply to justify investment, and then justifying a supply chain with an investment, so that they kind of stare each other down for a period of time to get that sorted. So a lot of the work we do is with the supply side of it, trying to get on the front foot about demonstrating we can supply a quality material in a volume that's useful, and do that sustainably and reliably, are the things that the investors tend to push back on. We've progressed from looking at very specific material handling and logistics issues through to optimization on a regional or localized project area. Sam, who's here from our research groups, just finished his PhD on some of that optimization around location of bioenergy facilities in his case, but could be any use of biomass from the forest as it relates to where the material's available from. We're doing some other work looking at having reliable predictions and understanding of how much biomass is available from different styles of, or different species of trees and different types of plantation arrangements. So we're starting to see that momentum. We're working with the likes of pellet producers that are currently exporting wood pellets to different markets internationally. We're working with other timber and panel producers who are now trying to recover biomass both upstream and downstream in their supply chain to produce energy in their facilities. So they're picking up momentum on a daily basis.
So we're getting closer. If we were to talk about technology, Matt, I know that CaneGrowers is working on some really, exciting tech focus, and you just mentioned blockchain and the BMP program. How do you bridge the adoption gap? Because, I think CaneGrowers more broadly, it's fairly well recognised that it's an ageing grower, cohort. How do you bridge that gap? What are you guys doing to try and, talk a 67-year-old, cane farmer from Balbera and Mackay about, technology?
Yeah, it's a great question, because that's...
If you've got the answer, I'd love to know. Yep.
I'm happy to everyone else tell me the answer too, because the biggest challenge in a lot of agriculture is adopting new practices and adopting new technology. And obviously it has to fit within the business structure, the thinking of the producer, and also have to generate some dollars for them in their back pocket. And that's one of the challenges. I suppose from our point of view, you can't really judge a book by its cover in some ways, because that technology gets adopted from the diverse range of growers we have in our industry. And our BMP program, for example, we have now 35% of the area in Queensland accredited in the program, and that's, and our average age of sugarcane grower in Queensland is between 56 to 62. So they're all adopting these sort of practices and adopting the approach. But I suppose what comes back to me a lot of the time, and I hear this in my head over and over, it says, Matt, show me the money. How does it come back? How do you, if you adopt this technology or use blockchain technology to show provenance of sugar, to show sustainable sugar, or create biofuels or green electricity, how do I benefit too? How can I actually get some of that action? And I suppose where we're thinking about blockchain technology is that you can actually apply that technology to show provenance of the production of sugarcane, but also can attach value to that component of sugar. So if that grower is actually improved his practices and can demonstrate, say, a sustainability outcome, or a reef water quality outcome, or a carbon benefit, or a natural catapult benefit, you can actually then trace that across the value chain, and the end users who are interested in that can pay for that, and you can actually direct back to them. And that would then start to speak volumes for adoption.
That's right. So it's all about proving out that commercial benefit. Polly, I'll switch over to you now. I know that you have an interest in future employment scoping, so looking at what jobs are into the future. Is the lure of more technology-focused roles the way we are going to support, traditional ag sectors transition into this new bioeconomy? So being able to make the agriculture sector, sexier to young people who really feel committed about, doing something good for the, globally in the future.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll tell you now, we just finished National Science Week last week, where the focus was on food and agriculture. And this was reaching our younger generations really down into primary and secondary as well. And recognising that agriculture is not the way that it used to be. So there's a lot of technology, I mentioned earlier when I did my intro, there's a lot of technology that is sort of dispersed throughout the food systems that we currently have, and is growing as well. So Mark just mentioned blockchain, and I saw something a little while ago with the raspberry trial, and looking at traceability and provenance and which farms, and potentially there's scope for nutritional content, which is what we're interested in as well. And so getting people interested in the sector from that level, so we have the workforces into the future, is something I'm very passionate about. Particularly for the food industry, they're always crying out for more food scientists, food technologists and engineers, and reaching that generation so we have this future bioeconomy, I think is really important. So getting through to them from a STEM perspective is quite key.
So starting early.
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
Mark, the waste and recovery sector, got to be honest, you guys have got a slight unsexy perception in this whole conversation, yet really you're probably one of the sectors that are right in the here and now, and you can implement real changes in this bioeconomy space. How are you going to overcome that? The unsexy, ugly duckling perception?
You're looking directly at me when you say that.
Sorry.
Sorry, yeah.
I said that with care and emotion.
I know, we've tried to put a calendar together, but it just it wasn't going to work. I think, you know, on this topic, but it's also about the changing economy. There's a reluctance to sometimes talk about winners and losers, or the transition that needs to happen, and ensuring that the right support is provided for areas that need to transition. And I think that's going to be a challenge when we talk about waste and recycling. Some people don't like using the word waste. Without going into too much of a discussion on that, I think, you know, we're going to have landfills for a fair amount of time still. But how do we look to create that transition plan? And it's really difficult for our sector to do, because I'll sometimes describe the waste and recycling industry as kind of dealing with the environmental impacts of, you know, society's lifestyles. So I think we need to have a seat at the table, which traditionally we don't have, and that's part of what needs to happen.
Okay, I'm actually going to pull out my magic wand, and the magic wand is when we live in utopia land. So no rules, no restrictions, no common sense thinking applies when you hold the magic wand. And my question is, and I'll actually start with you, Mark, because you are primed and you have the microphone ready to go.
Yep.
When you hold the magic wand, I want you to tell me, what is the one thing that we can do in a bioeconomy sense that'll make a difference to your sector? One thing. Hold the wand and use it for good.
I think something that needs to happen with conversations about the changing economy needs to kind of look at some of the learnings from, you know, think back to kind of the Howard era in terms of maybe an accord approach with industry, with universities, with local government, with state government, which is really taking a very visionary approach to where we want to be in 30 years, and everyone understanding their collective role in working towards that. I think at the moment there tends to be a kind of piecemeal approach, and as soon as politicians get in the way, all these other things kind of slow the process up or mess it up. So, yeah.
I'm actually, Bernadette, when you hold the magic wand and you feel the power of the magic wand, what is the one thing?
I think I'm relate back to Manfred Kirch's slide this morning, which was quite powerful, when we saw that 2/3 is used for fossil carbon and only 1/3 is biocarbon, and it's mainly around the chemical and food and feed area, and that whole area of fossil fuels is based around 2/3 of that sector. Now, in bioenergy, for which I represent, there is so much opportunity to actually turn that into a non-fossil base. Now, for many reasons, we understand why that's so huge. But if I, I understand the whole waste thing, and there's no problem in calling it waste because it is waste, and that it is a huge sector for which we can draw on to actually convert that into renewable energy. And so my magic wand is actually to draw in the word of emissions reduction into the conversation a lot stronger, and to apply that to energy and environment together at a federal level, and also for that to be part of things in terms of also understanding life cycle analysis, and also the whole cycle of carbon, and what is those technologies which actually can result in dramatic carbon emissions reduction. So
ripping the Band-Aid off around the conversation around carbon reductions without fear.
Yeah.
Yep, so that's your magic wand moment. Okay.
I guess on my side, I think we're all aware that investors in making big investments aren't comfortable when there's unknowns and moving goalposts.
Yep.
And as a result, in the lack of, or in an environment where we don't have stable strategic direction coming from governments and stable strategic policies to support whatever that direction is, and ideally that's positive and supportive of bioeconomies and emerging opportunities, but in the case that it's not, at least it's a known. because in the absence of that, the risks associated with the investment are now all pushed back on, as I said earlier, ensuring you have supply chains that are clearly stable and available for 10 years so they can take that risk out of the equation. So my magic wand would be that stability in governmental strategic direction and policy settings.
Okay.
Um,
Do you feel the power?
I do feel the power,
Yep.
yeah. So one of the huge challenges we have in agriculture, but also in sugarcane, is that I suppose that adversarial, confrontational approach between agriculture and its impact on the environment, and government and how it manages that risk to the environment. And if I lived in utopia, which I sometimes do, I'd love to see, instead of that adversarial position, have that collaborative approach to solve the problem. So get industry, get government to come together and say, right, put the advocacy aside and say, right, what do we want to solve here and how do we actually go about it? We've got 30 million tonnes of biomass we could do something really exciting with. There's opportunities to improve water quality to the reef, but also reduce carbon emissions to the environment, which also improves the reef. There's opportunities to grow investment in Queensland, in the economy. The infrastructure's there. The biomass grows in a pretty resilient way in a very variable climate. How do we take advantage of that? And our biggest market is Asia, which we hear is that's where the markets are. So I just think if we can come together and say, let's focus on finding a solution to that and bringing that value chain together, that would create a really strong opportunity for bioeconomy and where sugar could play a good role.
Now, Polly, I have to assign you the virtual power of the magic wand. So if there was one thing, virtual magic wand. If there's one thing that you could wave your magic wand and resolve or solve or find a solution for, what would it be?
Okay, it ties into probably what both of the marks were saying, which is a bit of a shared vision across all stakeholders, and that we know where we're going. So a lot of the work that I do actually crosses multiple industries. So I do work with food industries, but I also work with construction industries and all sorts of other weird and wonderful things regarding where we can place some of these bioproducts or biofeedstocks. And bringing together, we mentioned industry and government, and we have universities as enablers as well. But I do feel that communities and education, so there's a shared knowledge and a shared usage of that knowledge to work towards these kinds of goals. Because right at the beginning of the panel, I think Mark he said there's a bit of a piecemeal approach. And so we need to put these sort of puzzle pieces together and get our whole picture of where we're going. And I guess the other thing that I would love to see is we always talk about people who are sort of still business as usual. I want to make business unusual, the usual.
So I actually find that really interesting that out of our 5 panellists today, probably 2 of you landed on collaboration and communication, but the other 3, and I would say that the 2 issues are actually really strongly linked, that the magic wand moment actually reveals is that we just need to actually have these hard conversations and land on the pathway or land on the strategy to move forward. So it's about mainstreaming, these opportunities and actually making them a part of our everyday vernacular. Where am I up to with time? So do we have any more time from a couple more minutes? Radio. Well, if you guys are happy, I'm going to throw some questions at you from the audience. So here's a great question from Sam. Who leads the bioeconomy investment or commercialisation in regional Australia? Is it the resource, is it supply chain, is it technology, or is it market access providers? Who wants to answer that one? Okay, am I going to have to make one of you answer this one? Oh, I can see a microphone being raised, yeah.
Look, not to be too complicated about it, but yes to all. And I think we touched on it in that the magic wand moments is that it's got to be an integrated approach. And I mentioned in my description of reliable supply is critical to investment. Investment is critical to actually getting a supply set up to deliver that reliable supply. So it's got to be a partnership approach. We've had a few conversations with the forest growers that they alone aren't going to drive the development, but they're ready and willing to engage with somebody that wants to invest in a technology to use their feedstock, and they're ready and willing to cooperate with sugar, agriculture, where we can combine feedstocks in a sensible way. So there's no one that's going to own the agenda. I think it's got to be a collaborative approach.
Marcus, did you have a comment?
I just think it's important, just as a kind of contextual piece, that you know, the bureaucrats, the departments kind of really clearly understand some of the core concepts that we're talking about here. I used to get really uncomfortable when Victoria started the conversations around circular economy, and you'd be sitting opposite people putting policy together, and they'd be saying things like, oh no, we need people to, you know, consume less and stop producing waste. And I'm like, you're trying to attract private investment into something, and you're saying that there's going to be a diminished return.
Yep.
We're not talking about people necessarily consuming less, but we're talking about not generating as much waste. So keeping materials like moving through the economy. And I think some of these items, I don't know if there's a shared understanding of some core concepts with really important decision makers that sit in government.
It's that communication collaboration.
And on that is that it, the reality is there is going to be a transition. Yep. And I've just participated in some project planning around a CRC around waste management. Mm-hmm. And we acknowledged in that group that there is an amount of momentum in the economy, and you said it earlier, we're going to have landfills for a long time, and we need to learn to do that better, recycle better, capture better. At the same time, we need to convert our economy to something that's circular and reuses and recovers, but they're not mutually exclusive, and you can't do one in the absence of the other. So there's, and same with any of the bioeconomies and biouses. Timber has uses. There's potentially new uses emerging. Value propositions will decide where that feedstock goes, but there are going to be transition periods because every economy that we have has a momentum in it.
Bernadette, I'll let you just have a few final quick comments because I can feel the hurry up being given to me. So
yeah, so I agree with you, Mark. It's a combination of all three. But if you were to sort of reframe the question from not what's leading it, but what's the rate limiting step, I think might be a little bit better. And that too might change depending on the scenario. But I think one of the things that I keep on seeing as a rate limiting step is actually markets. And unless the market is there, then you're not going to be, you'll have your resources, you'll have your technology providers, you'll have everything lined up, and you just stop because you don't have a market. So I think that's something that really needs to be front and centre if you're going to go through the whole supply chain.
Thanks, Bernadette. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our panel. If you can please thank Professor Mark Brown, Dr. Polly Burey, Matt Kealley, Professor Bernadette McCabe and Mark Smith. Thank you very much. Done. Yep.
And if I can ask our speakers to please remain seated, and Kylie just to go over there too so that we can take a quick photograph. But please, could you put your hands together again for a stellar panel, and Kylie for negotiating an awful lot in a short period. And you know, part of the challenge in the bioeconomy must be to capture the knowledge that we've just heard. The successes, the opportunities in regional areas has to be an important part of that. So now we're going to move on to a panel chat on bioeconomy enablers. And this is going to be moderated by Dr. Julia Playford, an Executive Director in the Department of Environment and Science here in the Queensland Government. Julia has 2 decades experience in government leading high performance teams around science and innovation policy, strategy and programs. And she will be joined by a range of experts I'll leave her to introduce. Ladies and gentlemen, please a warm welcome to Dr. Julia Playford.
Enjoy.
I'm going to walk around with the microphone pumped out. Oh, that's not on. Is that on?
One, two, one, two.
We're on. So, hi everyone. Pleased to meet you all. While our team is going to join us and grab a seat down here, I thought I'd just briefly introduce myself. I work in the Queensland Government in science strategy and policy for in the Department of Environment and Science. Don't know why that confuses me every time. Which is really essentially code for I get involved in everything cool the government is doing at the moment. And bioeconomy is most definitely one of those. So we try to work to get the science engaged with the activities in government and industry to promote the Queensland economy. So look, I've got a terrific bunch of people here, and I'm going to walk across the front, which is bad showmanship, and grab a seat beside them all. And what I'm going to start with is I'm going to get each of them to introduce themselves. I recognise we are close to lunchtime, so if everybody could keep their responses brief, that would be terrific. So I'll hand over to you, Michelle.
Thank you. So Michelle Colgrave, I'm here from CSIRO Agriculture and Food, but I'm leading an initiative called the Future Protein Mission, which is really looking to create new protein industries for Australia. You've heard a lot about, I guess, the need for bridging the food gap, and so we're looking to really bridge the protein gap. Massive opportunities across the plant protein, animal protein, including livestock and aquaculture, and also the new and emerging protein production systems, whether it be things like insects that can create wealth from waste, or looking at extracting bioactives from some of those wastes that you've just heard about, or also looking at precision fermentation as a really new and emerging and exciting opportunity. Thanks.
Thanks, Julia. Michael Burke, I'm the Director of Biofutures Queensland, a priority sectoral team within the Department of State Development, Infrastructure, Local Government and Planning. So we have a vision for the, the economic activity that is involved in the industrial biotech and bioproduct sector. We think Queensland has tremendous advantages and is a tremendous opportunity both economically and environmentally for the state.
Thanks, Julia. My name is Paul Bertsch. I'm Science Director of Land and Water in CSIRO, and I led the development of a proposal for the Synthetic Biology Future Science Platform, which is now a reality and is led by Claudia Vickers, and it's been in existence for about 5 years. I also had the privilege of serving as interim Queensland Chief Scientist, where synthetic biology and engineering biology and advanced biomanufacturing was my major area of focus. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Ashleigh Morris. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Coreo, and we're a boutique circular economy consultancy supporting both private and public actors to take the circular economy out of theory and put it into practice.
Hi everyone, it's Jeremy Mansfield. I'm the National Sustainability Operations Manager for Lendlease Building, and we're a global scale developer, owner and builder. And I think one of the things that sets us apart at the moment is that we've got a commitment to a net zero scopes 1 and 2 by 2025, and an absolute zero carbon scope 1, 2 and 3 by 2040. And I think that's a game changer, and some of the work that we're doing with the bioeconomy and working in collaboration with Queensland Government and with others is highlighting the opportunity that presents.
Hello, Matthew Peters, my name. I'm Chief Economist at QIC. QIC is a government-owned corporation. We're a funds manager. We manage the defined benefit superannuation funds of the state government, as well as having a large number of private sector clients as well. What we're in the game of is seeking out assets to invest in on behalf of our clients that meet their return and risk objectives, as well as their ESG objectives. And I can tell you that the interest in anything to do with ESG is really top of the list of our investors at the moment, as well as anything that can generate a yield in this very low yield environment. My personal interest in this area stems from about 4 years ago, where I attended a conference with one of the, I was actually in the audience, and one of the sessions was on bioeconomy. I think it was Ian O'Hara lamenting the fact that you're having difficulty raising investment funds from the private sector. And you mentioned QIC as one of the places that wasn't funding. So I put my hand up in question time and said, oh, why do you think that's the case? And they had a very idiosyncratic chairman called Peter Andrews, who turned around to me and said, oh, why do you think it's the problem? And anyway, I noticed that looking at the previous panel, that problem of getting investment from transitioning from the idea stage to implementation is still an issue. So hopefully we can solve some of that at this forum.
Well, thank you, team. Now we have an amazing team of people here, and we're talking about bioeconomy enablers at the moment. So the chat box is still working. It's the same chat box as the previous time. And if you can put any questions in, that would be really helpful for me. So feel free to put in any questions for the panel, because they're a terrific bunch of people. So I'm going to just direct my questions to each one in turn rather than to a specific person. And so my first question to you all is really, what are the advantages that Queensland has in building a bioeconomy? What are our advantages? How should we be selling ourselves to overseas companies to attract them here? What should we be talking about as the bioeconomy advantages for Queensland?
So I'll start and I'll reiterate, I guess, some of the comments you heard earlier. We know that we've got a secure IP environment. We've got a fantastic research capability here. We've also got the access to things like feedstocks. We've got land availability. So there's all of these that work in our favour. But we've also, I think we act as a food bowl into Asia. So we've got this incredible opportunity to build on brand Australia and use things like technologies like blockchain and other agri-tech that will then take us into those markets and use the trust of our brand.
Love brand Australia.
What Michelle said.
Go ahead, Michael.
You've taken all my thunder. Look, I guess from a government perspective, we do have strong government leadership in the sector, and I think that is really important. It's not perfect, it's imperfect, but there is a focus right from the Premier to the Deputy Premier on the biofutures sector, and that's important. It's important for us to continue to promote Queensland at a federal level, working with local governments, with GW3s and the likes. So I think that is also an important enabler.
Paul, you've been selling us overseas. What do you sell us?
Well, it's getting harder and harder to add on to these things, but certainly the long-term investment by the Smart State and then Advanced Queensland in the knowledge base here in Southeast Queensland, which I call the DNA coast. But what's more important is the connectivity to regional Queensland, where the production actually has to go on. And I think that's quite critical. So Australia is well positioned, as we've heard many times this morning, but Queensland is particularly well positioned because it's all in one state. We have the port infrastructure, which hasn't been mentioned either, but it was mentioned earlier. And so we're really well positioned to be a tremendous leader for the nation in advancing advanced biomanufacturing and exporting to the emerging markets.
Terrific. Sorry, I know it's getting harder.
And add on, but I think something that hasn't been said is actually the open-mindedness and willingness of industry to transition, to ask new questions, to be bold and to innovate. And I think it is supported by public leadership as well. Could it be stronger? Yes, but I think there is an intent now in recognition of what we're all realising, that this economy is not really serving us, certainly not serving nature, that we can actually start to ask fundamentally new questions and be bold, brave and innovate and do it together and support our regional areas as well.
Jeremy.
I'm wondering what kind of signals can we draw to the market that highlights that by 2030 our net zero region commitment for the Olympics actually has been implemented within a plan that actually goes that long, that actually drives markets and industry to support and participate in that and drive investment as well.
Yep, Olympics a fantastic opportunity for our industries, I think, and for changing the economy.
What we hear at QIC is that international investors, they know how good we are here in terms of our technology, our infrastructure, our natural resources, our skill set, our education base, our research. That's not the problem for them. The problem is scale of the investment on the one hand and the cost of due diligence when you're looking at a whole lot of individual small projects. They're the killers. So if you're looking at investing just in individual projects, the return that you're going to require because of the risk, the idiosyncratic risk, is going to be so high it's going to kill you. So the way out of that is to the scale and the due diligence is to combine projects together in a portfolio, that'll spread the risk out and give you scale and make it far more attractive to international investors to come in and take not just shares of an individual company, but spread across the whole, Queensland bioeconomy proposition, right? And that's what we're looking at the moment at QIC, developing something like that. If we can do that, I think we'll have no trouble getting money into the state and into the industry. Just on the, I will just quickly say on the Olympics. The Olympics is a fantastic opportunity for Queensland to showcase itself. It's also a fantastic opportunity for Queensland to shoot itself in the foot, right? Because the blowtorch is going to come on us as to what are we doing as the highest level carbon emissions per capita country, state in the world. What are we doing about that? And we're all in a glow of how great it's going to be to showcase Queensland. That could turn very bad for us, because I tell you now, our investors are going to be asking that question. And so the urgency that is now to get things like the bioeconomy up and running partly because of the Olympics. We've got probably 5 years before it happens. And so I think we've really got to make a move, and we've got to make it quick.
Music to my ears, fantastic. So the next question, we've had a little positive question until we ran out of positives to talk about, is now, what do you think we need to do to enable the bioeconomy from your perspective? What are the key enablers we need to enact to get the bioeconomy going in Queensland? Going to go through the line.
I was going to say, is it fair if I go first again? But I'll have a crack. So I think we just heard about collaboration, and I think collaboration over competition, moving together instead of working in silos, is one of the things we absolutely have to do. But you've also heard about scale. A lot of these new technologies require massive scale of investment, and in order for that investment to come, they've got to have a diversified sort of risk portfolio. So I think those are the key things. It's how do we work together across industry, government, academia, bring the science innovation potential that we have here to fruition. But at the same time, we've got to understand the markets. We've got to build on those export markets, because Australia itself is a small market globally. So we really have to look outside Australia, look outside Queensland.
Okay, I think I am not being fair, am I? So let's go to Ashleigh next, just so that we can mix it up a bit.
Yes, sure. I think, touching on what Matthew was just saying, portfolio funding is a big one, or systems-based financing. I think that's going to be a big game changer to being able to drive the investment in, scale it up, and get the visibility to what is possible through a bio-led economy. But something that Professor Ahara mentioned this morning, which is where the circular economy and bioeconomy come together, is the architecture of our economy today is linear. We extract and we transact, and we need it to be fundamentally circular. We need things to flow through both monetarily and our materials to keep flowing through and creating value. So the biotechnology for me is a means of substitution of materials, as well as new advances in sciences and leadership, but also we need that architecture in the economy to be circular.
I'm going to let Jeremy have a go next.
Thank you, and it's actually a good segue, because I think joined up conversations, so even though there's a lot going on in the food sector, the biofuel sector is looking to input some feedstocks from as a waste byproduct to get its life cycle emissions down to zero or near zero. So we need joined up conversations across sectors to see those opportunities and not see them as one or different sectors, because there's value in all of those that can be extracted, and also start to make commitments. The Queensland Climate Action Plan actually has another thing in there about net zero emissions plan. Now, what does that mean? It's still yet to be written, I think, but it actually means that they need to provide some signals, some indications of commitments, that as we develop these new projects, they start to see those commitments. We've already mandated, biofuels on projects where it's available. We're starting to do trials at the next scale, such as B20 up at Caboolture Hospital with state government. But we want to copy what the UK business is doing. They've mandated elimination of all liquid fossil fuels as of May of this year.
Yep.
And using, products that actually have eliminated those emissions and actually started to drive a different type of economy over there in terms of supporting, other types of products that are alternative and not fossil fuel based. So we've got to start to set some commitments and plans and implement them in terms of project delivery.
Great. I'm going to hand over to Michael now.
Thank you. And
He's got
again,
notes.
another good segue. I made a note from Jim Philps' conversation this morning with us about public procurement and making a market, and I think everyone has touched on that, that there needs to be market signal. The government has an ability to provide that, and it is certainly part of our mandate is to how do we use the public procurement from state government to drive demand to make a market, whether it's biomethane in pipelines, whether it's biofuel in construction, in marine, we've done aviation trials. We're working with public transport companies, so we can mandate at one end, but we can also be out there in the market creating a signal. So.
Terrific. Paul, your turn.
Thanks, Julia. So I think the two things that are critical are developing the ecosystem for innovation here in the DNA coast area. And as interim Queensland Chief Scientist, I had the privilege to spend quite a bit of time in the Bay Area, interacting with about 24 companies that are synthetic biology companies that are actually moving to scale, and really understood that ecosystem and how it's synergistic. So that's really important that we continue to build on that. We do have the first biofoundry in Australia out at Dutton Park at the Ecosciences Precinct. We need to build that up at scale. We need a bioincubator, et cetera. And then in the regions, we need at scale manufacturing facilities, fermentation facilities. And this is a very unique opportunity of build it and they will come, because it's been demonstrated time and time again that there's a global bottleneck in terms of fermentation facilities. Yep. And then we have all the other differentiators, and those companies are willing and ready to come to Queensland.
Fantastic. We are trying to sell that story. Terrific. So last but definitely not least, have you got any further comments from the QIC perspective, Matthew?
Yeah, well, obviously on the funding side of things, Queensland's developing a sizable funds management industry, actually. You've got the merger of Sun Super and Q Super. It's going to be, if not the biggest, the second biggest superannuation fund in Australia. You've got QIC, where I think about the third largest institutional investor in Australia. You've got Suncorp, you've got QTC, for example, in the pub, all involved in the finance sector. Now, each one of those organisations at some point, or continually like us, have links back to the government in terms of we're being funded by the government, we've been funded by the taxpayer of Queensland. And to that extent, I feel we have a certain obligation to the state. We have to, of course, manage the investment objectives of our clients primarily, but within that scope, I think we do have an obligation to look for investments in the state that are going to drive growth and drive better outcomes for the state. And I think the bioeconomy is critical in that. So what we need, I think, is to step up as a group to be able to facilitate investments into the area, both of our own local money, but also of international investors. And we do that through being able to put together portfolios that are attractive investment vehicles, that we use our expertise to do the due diligence on behalf of the investors, so we reduce costs in that way as well as promoting the ESG aspects of the investment, because now investors are not just looking at the old, here's risk, here's the volatility, here's sort of return, here's the volatility of return, so that's the risk, so I'm going to maximise that risk-adjusted return. Part of the risk now is what is your exposure to ESG? The higher that exposure is, the lower the risk. The lower that exposure, the higher the risk. So investments in this space actually lower the risk and increase the risk-return calculus for the investor. We've got to promote that. And it's our responsibility as fund managers, as superannuation funds, as other finance instrumentalities to sell that story to our investors, both the public sector and the private sector.
Marvellous. I can see a Bioeconomy Forum investment in our future. I don't know whether Stuart's up the back there, but I can see it coming. Look, thanks very much, everyone. We've really reached the end of our time, and I note there are some marvellous questions in the question area, but I think we might be best going to lunch and having people come and talk individually to each other at lunch. Just before we finish and go to lunch, I would like to just mention that thanks to the Life Sciences Queensland, but I would also like to thank a couple of my team have been very heavily involved in the program. So I'd like to thank Stuart McIntyre and Vicky Lowe for all their work to set up the forum as well. So thank you very much to all our panellists, and hopefully that's just piqued the interest of people in enabling more for the Bioeconomy Forum and understanding their role.
Thank you, Julia. And if I could ask our panellists to remain so we can just take a photograph for prosperity's sake. Thank you very much for both the generosity of your time and the generosity of your answers. And I like Julia's idea that you tap someone on the shoulder over lunch and ask them your question. But if your question is not answered, we will make sure you get an answer to that. So to continue to ask those questions throughout the afternoon. Lunch is going to be held now, and remember to visit the networking visualisation tool. We really do value your feedback. And then for the parallel sessions which are up next after lunch, the room you need to attend will be on the back of your name tag. So if you go to the back of the name tag on your lanyard underneath your name, and it will have the room you need to go to. They are all straight through the doors you entered and right down that corridor. Any problem at all, tap me on the shoulder or go to the registration desk. I'll see you back a little bit later this afternoon. Thank you.